The result of the 115 charges, the allegations of corruption and fraud that has been leveled against Manchester City could be nearing its climax. It could be over. In fact, the verdict may be out as early as this week, according to football finance expert Stefan Borson, that results in a potentially nuclear expulsion from the Premier League. We've got it all to talk about. There's some articles to go through, and there is, of course, the consequences, the ramifications, the outcomes that may see litigation carry on for years to come from other Premier League clubs, either towards Manchester City if found guilty, or to the Premier League lawyers in a world where they are found innocent. We're going to talk about it right now. Please smash the like button if you enjoy this football finance kind of content. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already on Sean Butler TV. Hit the notification bell and drop some comments. Let me know your thoughts as we go through this latest update. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start with the article, shall we? This is from Football 365. Manchester City FFP this week claims made over charges email after nuclear expulsion verdict. A football finance expert reckons Manchester City could finally hear the verdict. This sounds weird. This week in their FFP case, following months of speculation, an independent commission hearing to examine 115 charges, in fact, there was more than that in the end, laid by the Premier League against Manchester City, started in September of 2024 and ended in December of last year. The Premier League opened an investigation way back in 2018, and after a number of legal delays, charges were finally laid in February of 2023, and the club were referred to an independent commission. The charges against the citizens relate to the requirement to accurately report financial information, including around the value of sponsorship deals, the submission of details of manager and player pay information, and to a club's responsibility as a Premier League member to adhere to UEFA's financial regulations and to the league's own profitability and sustainability rules, known as the PSR. We know that Manchester City formally denied all allegations and said that they were innocent of all charges and were looking forward to their day in court. But we do have some updates here and some insight from Stefan Borson, who, by the way, Stefan Borson used to be employed by Manchester City. He was employed years ago to facilitate a takeover, not with the Manchester City group that currently are the Abu Dhabi group and Silver Lake Partners, who currently own the club, but before then, a previous takeover bid that took place years ago. He's a very regular commentator on Talk Sport. He says, I think 10 months is enough now, and whatever the decision, there's little justification for it stretching on further. By the way, guys, remember, this deal did come, the hearing that took place with all of the information laid out to the various people that were involved, the independent jury, that finished in, I think, November or maybe December of last year. And then the three independent adjudicators were given enough time to go through everything. And we were expecting, and we were almost promised that the outcome would be known by March of this year. We hadn't heard anything since March. In the summer, there was rumors that it was going to be drawn out before the end of the summer and before the transfer window. And we still haven't heard anything. But in the last couple of weeks, we've been hearing that it's due soon. And Stefan Borson has gone out on a limb here and said potentially, not definitely, but potentially, this is going to be an imminent outcome that is known to all of us. He carries on saying, I think that's why people are expecting it, just simply because of the passage of time as opposed to it meaning anything about which way it's gone. I've always said, I think the longer it goes, the worse it is for City as a concept, but it's quite hard to know whether this is late or whether it's about right because we don't know any of the details. It's amazing, isn't it? In a world of, in an industry like football where rumors are everywhere all of the time, transfer speculation, insiders, agents feeding stories to journalists. We know about things. As a Tottenham fan, we sort of somehow knew that Daniel Levy was going to be leaving the football club in his chairmanship long before he did. We've heard rumours about £100 million injections of capital as early as August. It finally happened last week. So very few things in the footballing world stay secret for very long. But the outcome of this particular trial, there's been very little information about which way it's going, why it's taking so long, what the outcome will be, and what the punishments will be, or the other collateral damage will be inferred, regardless or depending on the result going either way. Let's carry on with the story though. But Borsa now reckons the verdict could be delivered this week after months of waiting. He added, I think it could drop any time to the parties. It wouldn't be a big shock to me if it came in an email for release this week. Of course, it might not, but it wouldn't be a surprise. Obviously, then we'll see how long it takes for that then to be disseminated out to the outside world. Well, you would imagine that would get out very, very quickly. Now, former Scottish footballer Davy Winnie, who is now a sports lawyer for London-based firm Gilson Gray, revealed in August the reasons that fans are still waiting for a verdict in Manchester City's case. Winnie told the paper in August, there are several reasons why this is taking quite as long as it has. Firstly, the sheer volume of charges. There's a whole swath of issues that the three-person panel is having to wade its way through in terms of evidence documents, leaked emails, various disclosure obligations. It's a pile of stuff. And then I think the three-person panel knows the weight of the decision. So I think they want to get it right. The hurdle that it needs to jump here is the balance of probabilities. But because of the sheer seriousness of the charges, it could actually lead the panel to applying a heightened scrutiny. He also went on to say, when the decision comes down, and if some of these charges, not even all of them, but then some of them are proven, I would not be surprised if other teams in the Premier League jump on the bandwagon, as it were, and start their own proceedings against either the club or the Premier League. If it were a fine, you could put any number you want, and Manchester City will just reach into the back pocket and pay it to them. A fine is a win. You're then maybe looking at ratcheting up a points deduction that could be potentially applied retrospectively with the past seasons, so lost titles. I suppose the ultimate would be expulsion from the Premier League. That would be the nuclear option. They've got restrictions and potentially on a player registrations or conditional punishments or suspended sanctions or a combination of them all. But I think the big one for Manchester City that they don't want is expulsion from the Premier League. Anything else they'll deal with, they can handle. Look, guys, what I would say regarding this particular story is, and I'm going to come back to another story in a second because there was a story. I did a video about this I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. There was stories out from the Mirror that were suggesting that Liverpool are going to be the big beneficiary of any potential outcome that favours against Manchester City, in that they will potentially sue Manchester City for fortunes because of their implied alleged breaches of these rules, and that had it not been for those things happening, then Liverpool would have won more titles, more trophies, etc. But I said to you in a video before that, during that video, I said that whole concept is ridiculous. There's two reasons why they shouldn't be. If there was some mammoth guilty verdict where, in the end, there were points deductions retrospectively, that they shouldn't be handing titles to the teams that came second in the cups or in the league, because ultimately the entire reality, the entire timeline would be different. The players that did go there to Manchester City that might not otherwise have gone there had they not been able to afford it, with all of their ridiculous resources anyway, and the fact that they found all of these loopholes and things in the past, despite having the resources, more money in the ground than basically anybody has ever printed in the history of humankind, they still decided to cheat anyway. But that doesn't mean, and the same with the Chelsea allegations as well, it doesn't mean that because those teams succeeded whilst cheating, that the teams, like everybody just moves up one position, because the players that went there to their clubs that maybe otherwise wouldn't have done would have gone elsewhere. And then those clubs that signed somebody else, they would have gone elsewhere. And so the butterfly effect here has to be considered. I don't think that there's any way you can know for sure that had Manchester City or Chelsea later on, when those 74 charges finally get investigated, and whether they're guilty or otherwise. Again, this is presuming guilt, by the way. There's no way of knowing what that new timeline would looked like. There would have been different injuries. There would have been different red cards. There would have been different players playing in different positions. A whole different set of circumstances, a plethora, an infinite amount of different outcomes would have materialized. And so I don't think you can just assume that everything else would have been the same had it not been for these teams doing what they were doing. And it's ludicrous to put it up. But the second reason why that shouldn't happen is because in a generation's time, when people look through the annals and the archives of footballing history, and they look at I don't know, the 2016 or 2015, 2013, whatever, the cup successes that Manchester City may or not have won. And again, I'll include Chelsea in this if later they are also found guilty of the same sort of misdemeanors with regards Abramovich's time, that Todd Bowley went sort of cap in hand to the Premier League and acknowledged when he first took over and went through the books. The reality is that if those clubs have breached those rules, they should be stripped of their titles, but there shouldn't be a replacement winner. Instead, there should be a no champion winner etched into those trophies for the history of the footballing story. Just so that in a generation's time, when some young child looks into the history of what happened over the past 50 years and sees those seasons where Manchester City's titles were stripped, if they're replaced by Liverpool or other teams, then there'll be no kind of asterisk. There'll be no memory of necessarily what happened. Whereas if there's no title, if there are those kind of those obvious gaping holes in the story of who won those seasons, trophies, then there'll be questions asked forevermore. What happened in those seasons? Why was there no winner? Oh, it's because these teams did what they did. And I think that would be the biggest embellishment, the biggest indelible mark that could be left on the reputation of those clubs. That forevermore, on those titles, on those trophies, the names will be scratched out, and there'll be a gaping hole that's left, so that no one will forget that despite having all of the access to all of the wonderful resources and the bottomless pits of money that these teams had, if they cheated, that they still went about their system. They already had the obvious advantage, but they used additional advantages, additional mechanisms to engineer outperformance that nobody else did. And as someone that has been a proponent for the last, since I've been doing content, that the biggest problem in football is abnormal access to money and the inability for the Premier League and UEFA to create a coherent and enforceable set of rules that tries to keep the playing field as level as possible, whilst at the same time allowing for ambition to flourish. Then that would be the only outcome that I would see being, at least in terms of the titles, in terms of points deductions currently or future transfer bans, expulsion from the league. I'll leave that up to the people that know the details. But in terms of historically going back and allocating trophies to other teams that came second in tournaments, finished as runners-up in trophies or in the league, those sorts of things, you can't be handing out trophies to those teams because they didn't win it. The other teams won it via cheating. And it's better, in my opinion, to leave those sorts of indelible marks on those trophies' histories. Now, let me just quickly pivot to this other story here. So this is a story from a while ago. As I say, a very quick side note that the reality is that people like the Mirror here are talking about Liverpool could pocket millions from Manchester City's 115 charges legal battle. But in reality, I'm not sure why they're talking about Liverpool. I don't know if it's just clickbait, but as I say, it can't just be that the teams that come second have somehow got a leverage in any potential legal battle because they were the team that was deemed to be punished the most by somebody else's, forbearings of the legal avenues, doing things by the book. That can't be the case because everybody is a victim of it. Every single team is a victim of it. Teams that went down, maybe they sold a player. Maybe they didn't, but maybe other teams around them bought or sold players as a consequence of the sort of collateral damage of a player leaving one club and going somewhere else. You could make the argument that a team that didn't buy a player nor sell a player to or from Manchester City is just as much a victim as anyone else is who did or didn't do that, or who could have got a player but didn't, or who didn't have to sell a player for the amount of money they did, because ultimately you're creating an entire new timeline. If Manchester City are guilty of the charges to some extraordinary degree, then the amount of legality and potential litigation that could come their way is so extraordinarily high because of the potential ramifications of lost revenue, of lost opportunity, that it leads you to think that the three-man or the three-party independent adjudicators, they may not move in that direction because how do you finish the story? If they are guilty, expulsion from the Premier League punishes Manchester City, but it doesn't recompense or compensate any of the other teams that may or may not have been affected and will have been affected indirectly via the entire new timeline that was created through cheating. Teams that got relegated, they could make an argument that somehow the transfers and the various different the various different probability curves that pivoted away because of one player that shouldn't have gone there would have gone somewhere else. They could make an argument that they wouldn't have been relegated had it not been for Manchester City. Teams that didn't qualify for Europe, or did but didn't qualify for the next tier up in Europe, they could make the argument that that happened as a consequence of Manchester City. The ramifications and the outcomes, litigiously speaking, are so pronounced and profound that you would probably lean into thinking that the three-tier adjudicators might look at this and think it's just easier for the world of football to move forward if that timeline doesn't play out. And that's a concern. That's a concern. I don't think you should let the essence of simplicity to get in the way of the right outcomes here. But if it does go the way that Manchester City are in fact guilty, how this story resolves itself is unknown to me. But if I was the chairman of a football club, I would be sitting there making sure that if anybody's going to be claiming compensation against Manchester City, then everybody should. And what that looks like, I don't know. And I would also sit there and think as a Chelsea fan that they'll be next, especially if they are also guilty. And just because Todd Boehly wasn't the person that did those deeds necessarily, Chelsea, the football club, are the benefactors of the brand that the club has built on the back of Abramovich's spend. And if that included similar sorts of breaches, then again, they are able to attract players today because of the brand that Chelsea built under the guise and under the stewardship of a guy that, again, had abnormal and obscene access to resources that was accompanied by a propensity to cheat. It's a big deal, and I don't know how to feel about it. Let me know your thoughts, though, guys. Like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, bye-bye.